believe in God?
Every description of God that I've heard holds God to be all-powerful, very typical, and all good. And I see earthquakes and tornadoes and disease, childhood leukemia, and I see all of this and I say, I do not see evidence of both of those being true simultaneously. If there is a God, the God is either not all-powerful or not all good.
There he is, Neil deGrasse Tyson. I think we should probably pull that intro apart. Rich, I know you've got some views on it. We might do that shortly, I think, and just analyse what it is he's saying. Kicking off episode 25 of this live podcast of an atheist, a believer, and a pastor walk into a bar. Welcome. Look, it seems like yesterday that we kicked off this podcast series. 6 months later, we've now hit the 25th episode. Wow. That went really, really quickly. We even had a different name back in the day for the podcast, originally in an attempt to make sure you, the viewer, understood easily what we're on about, just by being very clear, as was the title back then, Beyond Belief, Making the Invisible Visible. I still like that, but my daughter Ellie came up with something which was kind of quirky, and we all love it, which is the name, an atheist, a Christian, and a pastor walk into a bar. We loved it. I don't know why we changed it to believer. I think that was Rich's idea. I like the Christian bit anyway. It doesn't really matter. Earlier today, I had to look back at our library podcast to remind me of the very first broadcast and what it was that we talked about. It was loosely based on evidence, I believe, or lack thereof, evidence for God. Back then, it was just Rich, Luke, and myself. I have intentionally grown those numbers to get a more varied aspect of what is essentially an exercise in discovery. We all have differing claims of what is real to us, and that invariably can clash and at times get a little bit frustrating, but we're still here in spite of our incessant disagreements. Great to have your company tonight. Wednesday, the 19th of June, 2024, just gone 8 p.m. Australian Western Standard Time in Perth. Normally live on Facebook and YouTube. I mentioned this last week that Facebook has decided that those streaming live on Facebook must have 100 followers. I just went onto Facebook to try and find out how to follow, and we couldn't find it. That may have something to do with it. So I'll have to check that down. It does say 19 followers on there, but we can't access that either, so there might be an issue. Certainly, it...
Rowie, we lost you.
Okay. Where did it drop out? Just doing the same as it did last week.
Right there, yeah.
It was just quick. Yeah,
So
it was only like 5 seconds worth.
Okay.
That's why I employed the aircraft carrier signaling system.
That's right. Which is not helpful when I can't see the screen because I'm actually reading off. It's never mind. Anyway, so if you don't already follow us, please do. That would be amazing. You don't have to watch this podcast on Facebook. All you have to do is follow us. God knows where we're going, but follow us, please. Tonight, we're talking about what we got out of doing this podcast and asking, has it been helpful? Has it been enjoyable? Has it made you think about stuff that you wouldn't or hadn't considered before? Have you changed your mind at all? Have you done all of the above? Jump on and tell us what you think, with God or without God. That's what it's called tonight. The positives and the negatives. Each of us have become perhaps more attuned into the proposed idea of a higher power, as it were. So I thought it would be good to do some reflecting. And this is also a great opportunity for you at home to tell us if anything about your beliefs have changed in any way over the past 24 episodes. We've certainly delved into some very deep issues, as you would expect, with a mix of Christians and non-believers. I'll put a link on Facebook today, which gives you access to all 24 episodes if you so want to do that. So tonight's panel is back to where we started from, with Rich, Luke, and myself. Jason is supposed to be joining us. Suresh is unavailable, unfortunately. Busy man. So welcome, gents.
Yeah, it's good to be here again. 24.
No, right. Well, this is 20. Yeah, this is 25th. Incredible. If you've been just joined us waiting patiently, we did have some issues as we seem to do every week. So we're not going to say we start at 8 o'clock anymore. We're going to say sometime around 8 o'clock. That way you'll be ready, hopefully for us. So I'm just going back to check my microphone, make sure it's still on. Yeah, well, fantastic. So what, if anything, has changed for us? Is there a particular episode that really stood out for you guys? I talk about the geographical episode. I think that's a ripper. We talked about it it was some time ago, how the geography for you, where you're located, where you're born, is the first thing, I guess, that decides most likely who it is you're going to affiliate yourself with, what church you're going to go to, what do they teach, are they Christian, are they Hindu, or whatever in the world you might be. And I think that's probably one of my favorites. Guys, what stood out for either of you guys and as episodes that we've had? Take your time.
Yeah, I'll go first while you're having a think. For me, probably the one that, I don't know, stood out to me, or there's a couple. One I really enjoyed, I thought was valuable doing, was the Hell No episode. Does a belief in hell damage your brain? And it says yes. And I guess it's because it's explored a bit of a belief that a lot of people would say is foundational, especially to Christianity, but to a lot of kind of even, I guess, spiritual but not religious kind of people, which is the idea of an afterlife with a destination depending on whether you make it or not, some kind of thing. And just being on a personal journey about discovering the breadth of belief that's, I guess, allowable compared to what we were taught has been quite interesting. But that there, but also the idea of discussing like who gets in and who doesn't, and the kinds of damage it does on people, and especially the more vulnerable communities or marginalized communities in our midst. And I thought it was a good episode to really pick it apart. And I think for most of people who are listening, they'd really be surprised about how we all end up pretty much on the same side of the debate on that one, even given our individual backgrounds. So yeah, for me, that was one of the standout ones.
I've noticed that too, Rich, as we've gone along, the amount of agreement as opposed to disagreement, which makes it kind of a lot more. I mean, if you're diametrically opposed on everything, I mean, it's a pretty, I don't know, stale podcast, as it were. It doesn't show a lot of highlights. It's kind of, well, we just disagree on everything. What's the point? Yeah. But there are, and I mean, I think that's the reality of the difference between some forms of atheism, some forms of Christianity. It probably has more in common than not. It's probably could break it down to just a couple of things that we don't agree on. And as it turns out, they're the biggest things as far as belief goes, I would think. Yeah. But it's amazing how we can just agree on most things. I think that sort of paints a picture of us being fairly reasonable, I think, and we've talked about this a lot in the last couple of weeks, appreciating and respecting each other's views. Luke, any one standout for you?
There's been several that I've really enjoyed that I thought have just evolved into really great discussions. But I did really enjoy the Hell No one. And I mean, out of 24 episodes, I hate to kind of jump on and echo the same thing as Rich, but it is a bit of a passion topic of mine, and a really important one. So I thought that was fantastic to be able to really get into that. I also enjoyed the does faith stifle progress? The science versus religion, and I think what was the tagline, from Galileo to genetics, and I thought that was fantastic. We ended up really kind of unpacking the ethics around IVF and genetic considerations with abortion and the Catholic Church and different things like that. But for me, it's really, I think often it's such a false dichotomy between that science and faith are these opposites, that they play off one another when, in my view, they complement one another. That they're not opposites. So I thought it was really good to be able to discuss that and get different ideas around that and ask that question. But I've enjoyed every single one that I've done. And what I have loved is that we'll always start out with a topic and we will discuss it, but you never quite know where it's going to go and where the conversations are going to take you. And often it's it takes us into uncharted territory, but the dynamic of those conversations is always beautiful, I think. I get a lot out of it.
Yeah, I think it's important to have that freedom to move and not necessarily. There was an option I think we discussed a while ago about having it really quite specific and each person talking on a particular subject for a certain amount of time. We never tried that, and I'm not saying we won't or it may not work, but I love the freedom of just something comes up that is connected somehow, because it's broad. Let's face it, it's very, very broad. I mean, we've talked about incredible things. Up until recently, I had noticed that the most popular episode we've done, which was episode 8, which do dogs go to heaven? Not surprising, of course, because so many people love dogs. We included all animals in it, but we let's face it, cats are just a poor cousin to a dog, really. I mean, for all of the cat fans out there, I do apologize profusely. But recently, what's overtaken it in the amount of views the most was episode 4, Geography of Faith, an atheist to believe in a pastor walk into a bar. Episode 4, 94 views on that one. So, but there's quite a few that have a lot. The dogs go to heaven. I mean, I thought that was great. That's one of the ones that we're talking about, of course, where we all saw eye to eye. There was no difference in the way we felt. We all realized that, if there is a heaven, why would it not be dogs there? I mean, that would just be punishment. Whereas when I was in my early Christian, I assumed there wasn't there, because you had to confess that Jesus is Lord, and dogs can't speak, so they're not there. It's like, one of the things about growing up in a Pentecostal church is the not growing up as a child, but being involved in it, is that it's so precise. You can't just talk to God. You have to pray a certain way, otherwise it won't work. I mean, wow. The legalism, it's absolutely crazy. If you are listening, give us some feedback on all the episodes. Maybe you haven't heard them all. I have made them available. And in fact, if you just go into YouTube and search an atheist, a believer, and a pastor walk into a bar, you'll see all of the episodes there, complete with Rich's amazing AI graphics for each one, including Hell No and Does Christianity Stifle Progress? I've just got them all in front of me, just having a look. One of the ones I loved is there evidence for God? Faith versus fact. I thought that was a particularly good. And it'd be good to go back and see the podcasts that have got the most reaction from people. But if you're watching live tonight on YouTube, jump on and let us know. Has this podcast series had an impact on you? Lots of people, of course, jump on board and talk to us and tell us what they think. Which is the standout episode for you? We've covered so many things. Spirituality, that was a ripple. We talked about tarot cards and mediums and all that sort of stuff. I found that was particularly interesting, and there are so many more things to talk about. Even more recently, of course, we've done what I think the title is quite funny. What school would God send kids to? Just the question alone is kind of crazy. But so what else can we talk about as far as impact? I mean, we have changed our views, I think, on many things. I'm far more open than I was when I first
Mm.
started this. It was a kind of a, well, not a battle, but it was a discussion of opposites. Whereas now I think we're far more lenient and understanding of one another.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I've found that to be quite interesting. It's I think what's happened is because we've had a long run at it, we've been talking, and also with when Suresh comes on, it just adds another depth. When we have those other people, where I think we've got used to sometimes the different words and the different language we're using almost don't quite meet up. So in the beginning,
Mhm.
especially, one person saying one thing, the other person saying another thing, and they're not actually meeting up. And now I think we're finding that we're able to speak to each other where we're sort of getting at the heart of it. But just as you've been more open, I was looking at the list of them there, and certainly I was asking myself the question as a Christian believer. Obviously, a couple of things have happened for me. Strangely enough, one of them is I'm actually far more settled in my belief than I was before studying it, in the sense of um, the kind of God I believe in and the kind of religion and Christianity I'm practicing. It actually settled quite deeply with me. However, there was a couple of things that actually did really cause me to not necessarily change my mind, but actually think about it in a way that I've never thought about it before. And I think it was episode 3 for me that started some of the real deep thinking. That one was the one about prayer. Because it's really easy to think about prayer in certain terms when all you're doing is talking to the people who speak and believe and do the same little things you do. As soon as you start talking about prayer in that wider context, there's a whole lot of questions that you haven't even begun to ask about prayer. How does it work? And if you think that, you ask, let's just pick on the parking spot because that's, I guess, doesn't come with a whole lot of baggage. But now if I ask God for the parking spot, why does he choose me? Does it, because that means somebody else loses on the parking spot. And how do I win? And how do I lose? And is God picking favorites? And why does he pick me as the favorite? All that kind of questions that you don't ever learn to ask in church. But in this forum, you'll learn to ask those sort of questions. And for me, I've really refined my view of prayer quite significantly because of that episode, and it's been very good. It's been very good for me. So yeah, that's one thing that I've probably changed my views in a not insignificant way.
Can you think of what it was? Was it one specific thing that you
You know,
heard that sent you on a path to think about things differently, or?
it really was about the idea of there's another episode we did similar, is God a sports fan?
Yeah.
By the time I
Yes,
got
that's
there, I was a little bit back from the sort of real in the kind of traditions that I've come from. Prayer was seen, the language I use now is like a very triumphalist kind of attitude. We're on the winning side, and when we ask God for stuff, he's going to give us the stuff and not you the stuff, because we're on the good side here. We're on the right side. We're the favorites. It's never said that way, but the underlying a lot of the assumptions we make and speak about in church, that's the kind
Yeah.
of underlying assumptions. And that became
Absolutely.
very evident in that conversation. And I was like, yeah, there's a lot of things that I just say a certain way or even approach it a certain way that I hadn't considered the underlying questions because no one had asked it. And you, Ro, you were asking a few questions that forced me to really unpack some of that deeply. And it really is about, is prayer about, saying the right words in a way that stuff happens for me and I get good things, rather than, which now it's always been there, but now I'm very majoring on prayer being more so the thing that shapes me to become and speaking as a Christian, become the instrument of God rather than asking God to come and zap someone or drop some blessing in my lap. It's very much about who am I and who am I becoming to become a force for good and peace and love in this world. And yeah, so I still thinking through it, but my emphasis certainly has completely flipped, and I think for the better.
Yeah, it is incredibly complex, and I'm not sure we can ever kind of, drill down far enough on it to try and come up with a true understanding. And because if you read about, in the Bible about what talks the discussions of prayer, you have to consider that the people of the day were not us. So prayer and communication and all of those kind of things was a completely different world in which we live now. So to try and work out, I ended up just getting to the point where I thought, look, I don't need to be specific. God knows what I want, and I'll just rattle it off. And 9 times out of 10, that didn't work and it didn't come true. And so I thought, yeah, well, that's what I expect. What do you guys think about the what's become incredibly popular, particularly from America, of course? We're sending prayers. We're sending prayers to you.
I like the thoughts and prayers. Yeah.
Thoughts and prayers. And I've noticed it creeping into the narrative in Australia as well. We often, right on the back of America and tend to copy them to a degree, but yeah, sending thoughts and prayers. Any validity, anything good about that you guys can think of, or is it just rhetoric?
The action of praying on behalf of someone who is suffering is fine. There's no problem with that. But you can do the action without posting it on Facebook. And I think the problem has become, and it's become so evident, and this really came to the fore with the gun violence and massacre after massacre after massacre, and to the point where it became borderline comical that you would have right-wing Christian politicians who would adamantly refuse to concede in any area of gun control, anything that they felt was going to impact the Second Amendment and all this sort of stuff, because that's part of their freedom, right? And they're hung up on this thing of freedom. And so, and then obviously when there would be another school massacre, they would come out with a statement that says, we send our thoughts and prayers. And the hypocrisy of being in a position to make a positive change to prevent a future massacre from happening and refusing to do so because you have your own agenda, but then coming out saying you're going to be praying for someone, people rightly just went, what are you doing? This is making a mockery of prayer. It's making a mockery of so I think at the end of the day, prayer for me should go hand in hand with things, with action. Now there are things out of your control. So you can pray for something and it not be in your control. That's okay. But when you can act, when you can be a voice, when you can participate in making a change, be that a protest, be that getting involved in some sort of social justice for the thing that you're praying for on the ground, doing more than just talking about it or praying in your prayer closet behind closed doors. I think that's where the hypocrisy comes in, when you're doing nothing to actually make a difference that's in your power, and yet it's easier to just go, well, I'll pray for it and give the holy handball to God to come in and hopefully he'll fix it. It's like, no, this is supposed to be a partnership. We're supposed to pray to then go out and enact change and be a positive force in the world, not pray for something else to be a positive force in the world. It's a very, very different thing. And that's where the hypocrisy comes in. And I think you're right. We see it here all the time. And it's just as hypocritical here.
I always wonder what the expectations are from those people who just rattle it off like it's something that's amazing that I can say our thoughts and prayers are with you. I question whether or not there is any degree of actual expectations of what they think is going to happen when you say that en masse. All of America will join together and holding hands, saying our thoughts and prayers are with you. The hell does that even mean? Is it not meant to be on any practical level whatsoever, that the expectations are that somehow you're going to feel good about yourself in spite of the fact that your child has just been slaughtered in a school massacre because people's thoughts and prayers are with you? It was Ricky Gervais. Don't quote me verbatim, but he sent money to a charity after, I think it was Taylor Swift or something, said, or it might have been Rihanna, was sending thoughts and prayers. He said, and I just sent money on a practical level, and he copped an enormous amount of flack for that, as if he'd done something wrong. Sending thoughts and prayers has, I would imagine, and I don't know whether you agree or not, zero impact, I would have thought, on a practical level. Are there expectations that something's actually going to happen when they do that? I don't know.
Well, for me, I see it as functioning in two different ways. Part of it, and it's there, it certainly is, but this is the cynical side of me, where thoughts and prayers is a bit of a shibboleth. It's the term you use so that you let everybody know that you're on team right-wing Christian nationalism, or you're on team right-wing Jesus. That's how you know it, because if you say thoughts and prayers, oh yeah, he's one of us, you don't have to do anything. It's a code word that you put out there, and you do see it functioning a bit like that, especially amongst politicians. The other way I see it functioning is, it's interesting because it's not just prayer, like Orthodox deep Christian teaching. It would just be prayer, because prayer is the thing that transforms yourself and transforms the world around you. And if you're praying, you're expecting something to happen. But joining together thoughts and prayers seems to be a uniquely American phenomena in this. And I think, I'd be interested to see if there's anybody out there who's in this world, but it seems to have a lot to do with like theosophy. I can't say that word right, but that new thought where positive thinking is the thing that changes the world. It's not you can think thoughts and manifest them out. You can think positive and positive things happen. And we see bleeding into Christianity, where prayer is not a force for Christ-like transformation, but it's more like a magical incantation that somehow does something in the ether to make an effect. And it's from a very esoteric sort of almost occult kind of source that's crept into the society there. So that's I see those two things at work. For goodness sake, if you can pray in your closet, shut up, do something, and then do what Ricky Gervais does and just send some money. Or if you're a politician, make some change. Yeah.
And I think that
sorry, go on, Luke.
I was going to say, just to piggyback quickly off that, I think where Rich landed with prayer and where I landed as well, and I was similarly challenged and grew. I was forced to really reshape a lot of stuff in that discussion, which was amazing. But landing in a space where realizing prayer, yes, there is an element that we don't understand. I believe there is a transformative element. There is a something that can happen through prayer that isn't by your hand. I still believe in that aspect of prayer, although I cannot explain it or articulate it. However, I do think prayer is chiefly formative. The prayer transforms yourself, and when we are formed through prayer, then the action then follows. For example, if you have a friend or someone who's going through a messy divorce, and you see them and you go, "Oh, look, I'll pray for you." Well, okay, that's great. You do that. But if you're genuinely praying for that person and your heart goes out to them and you have compassion for them, and all of a sudden you're sad of what they're going through, that formation should then lead you to drop a meal to their house or do something, actually do something, whether it's send money to somewhere, whether it's actually pick the phone up or send a meal or an Uber Eats voucher or something, to do something. Yeah. And for me, when you're praying for someone who's grieving and hurting in a situation, that's the formation that comes. Well, how do I become an agent of God in this? How do I bring heaven to this situation? Genuinely, not for any other purpose other than to actually help this person. Yeah, that's when all of a sudden you go, well, that's a very different thing to praying for a food hamper to fall out of the sky, or praying that someone else does that. You do it. And that's formation versus excusing. The handball. So I think that's primarily, and even if we don't understand it, if you look, for any Christian who's listening, if you look at prayer as something that is supposed to primarily form and transform you to then participate in God's work in the world, then it doesn't matter whether we understand the supernatural side of it or not. It's like, just leave that. If we never understand it, or even if it doesn't happen, it doesn't matter, because at least you're doing this, and that's enough. Everything else is a bonus. So
I think that it was widespread that the discussion we had about prayer, I think it impacted us all. I hadn't thought, like, for instance, Luke, you were talking about when we're talking about praying for healing, and how you said that even if that person knows that there are other people who care enough to be praying for them, that in itself has a massive impact on them. I hadn't thought of it that way before. Whether the prayer ends up being what you had hoped it was going to be, the person still thinks, well, that is so cool. They care enough to actually pray for me. That in itself will have a benefit, whether anything happens or not. That is of benefit, and that's the kind of practical thing that you were talking about, which I hadn't thought about before.
Yeah,
it's great.
Yeah.
Go on.
No, I was just a throwaway comment. Just going to say, I've found that consistent with many of the topics that probably all three of us, or sometimes five of us, go in thinking this is fairly straightforward. I'm camp this, or this is my position, and it's like you kind of know because you haven't had to think about it too much. And then all of a sudden, when we're having these chats, you realize it's far more nuanced, far more complex, far deeper. That there's stuff you hadn't realized. It expands in the conversation, and with that, for me at least, I feel it's really brought a humility of seeing things beyond right and wrong, and for and against, and realizing that I'm not going to go too bullheaded here, because there's every chance I haven't fully considered everything about this position. And so maybe if I listen first and then speak, I'll be better positioned to understand. Which sometimes we do the other way around.
Guilty as charged, Your Honour. And just as a side issue, talking about Suresh, and we miss him. I can't think of too many people who don't perfectly exemplify the generosity. As we know, well, we may not know, there's another child who passed away, unfortunately, at Junior Lup Hospital, which has an enormously dark black cloud hanging over it at the moment, and has done for some time. He is with the family. That's why he's not here tonight. There's no more practical demonstration of love.
Absolutely.
The people he doesn't know, but that's where he is. And he apologized for not being here tonight. I said, mate, you don't have to apologize. What you're doing is amazing, as opposed to he could have sat at home and sent his thoughts and prayers.
Yeah, that's it.
Yep.
Which would have done nothing. What I want, on that, I want to think about, expand on what I consider to be almost, verbal stupidity, thoughts and prayers. What are the thoughts meant to be? how do thoughts permeate someone who's on the other side of the world? And I'm sending my thoughts and prayers. What thoughts? My favorite Martian. They don't even specify what thoughts they're sending. It's such a stupid, nonsensical throwaway line that is meaningless. And to me, it just insults the person on the other end. Good on you. You're sending your thoughts. Well, so what? What thoughts are you sending? Prayer, I can understand on a practical level. It's universal. We can all understand the need for that. I still don't think that sending it to someone instead of sending something practical, as you mentioned, like, is what it's all about. But thoughts and prayers, wow, we do talk some shit, seriously.
We do. And I think it's so much easier to write thoughts and prayers. Like there's been a few things in recent history where I have been thinking about someone and I am praying for them. And I could just, thoughts and prayers, what a lazy thing to do. But probably the effort, if I'm really am thinking, what am I thinking? Put those into words. Am I hurting? Am I, am I thinking, man, we've got to catch up for coffee, just unload. I'll buy you breakfast. Be specific. It takes it away from this thing up in the atmosphere so that you can wear a badge to let you know what team you're on to actually just connect with people deeply, I think is what's going on here.
I think even, we've spoken about that there's an aspect of prayer that, may act beyond does act beyond our understanding, but there is no aspect of thoughts that acts beyond our understanding. So unless a thought leads to an action, it's wasted. It means nothing. It might be interesting, it might be sad, it could be anything, but unless and not every thought should lead to an action, because I have some terrible thoughts that are just stupid, and it's like, it's a good thing you don't act on those things, because that would be a waste of time, for example. But then there are some thoughts that need to be acted on. And I think especially if we're talking, if you're thinking about someone who's gone through a hard time, it's not enough to think about them. It's not enough to even just tell them that you're thinking about them. That might be nice. It might make them feel like, someone's thinking of me, they care about me. But really, unless that follows through to, like you said, let's get a coffee, or let's some form of movement towards restoring healing or relationship or unity or whatever it is, whatever the reason is to be thinking of that person, then at the end it's really, it can be actually more about you, like, than about the other person. But I think that the phrase has just become a catchphrase. It's become a sort of generic throwaway line.
Whatever happened to sending love? I mean, on a practical level, it's no more. It has no more effect than thoughts and prayers, but at least it's not ambiguous. I'm sending my love. I'm sending my love, however that means. What I was listening to you. I talked to explain to Rich earlier. Luke, Lou's away in Melbourne, so our dogs are sitting outside in the cold, and they won't come in because they're waiting for her to come home because they miss her terribly, and it's just so dramatic. So occasionally they scratch on the door. I want to come in for 5 minutes, which is what I've just done. There will be another scratch on the door, no doubt, in the next half an hour or so, saying I want to go out again. So if I have to jump up and jump out for a second. But the whole weird thing I find about sending thoughts and prayers is the abstract of, and I mean, what people are saying, I mean, it's just their way of saying, I'm caring. I'm showing that I'm caring by saying thoughts and prayers or sending love. But the idea that thoughts can somehow be transmitted from your brain to somebody else's, it's, as you were saying, it's just a throwaway line. It really is.
I don't think anyone thinks that.
Silly.
It's more just it's almost virtue signaling in a lot of cases.
That's the word. That's the term I was looking for before. Which we see when these things pop up. And
where there are causes or issues that absolutely need advocation, absolutely need to be public, and but with the age of social media and this one-way univocal sort of communication, unidirectional communication, it's very easy to say the right thing in a post, but then do nothing about it. And I'm guilty of it. To be honest, I think about it all the time because I do this. And when we talk about prayer being formational, I've got to tell you, Rowie, that's part of my prayer all the time. Where I'm a voice and where I'm advocating and where I'm doing something, and it's just me saying something and not actually participating, even though I'll call other people out for doing the same thing. Like, help me change that. Help me find time for that. Help me let go of excuses to not be the very thing that I'm speaking against. And so I put my hand up for that. But it is something that we do, this virtue signaling. And I think thoughts and prayers becomes very much that. Hey, I'm a Christian. I'm sending thoughts and prayers, and I care about this issue, but I don't actually care enough to do something about it.
I think we're all guilty of that. When I was living as a Christian, I didn't need to do any of what I did to signal, to show. All I needed to do, and I stand by this now, for people who are Christians who want to be good people and do the right thing, is spend less time on your thing that you're doing with your relationship to God and prayer and study and all of the stuff that we get so caught up in. While you're doing that, you're not doing what is out there with need. We do focus in on, and as I've mentioned before about some of the Christian people I've worked with who just love flying the flag. Look at me. Look at this flag. I'm a Jesus freak. I mean, I'm a God botherer. Look how cool I am. It makes them feel good, but on a practical level contributes nothing to the need of the world. That is what the absolute essence of belief and following the character of Jesus must mean that that's how you live on a practical level. If you don't, then it's just all, as you said, virtual signaling. Is that what signaling? Is that what you said?
Virtue signaling.
Virtue signaling. Yeah. That's all it is. The other thing I wanted to talk about, which I don't think we've actually done a podcast on, which I would really like to do, because I watched. Just let me bring up this so I can. I watched a very interesting talk last night titled "Proof of Heaven." I don't know if you've heard about the book, written by the once skeptical neurosurgeon Eben Alexander, who had an horrific E. coli infection that pretty much ravaged his body to death and had little or no chance of surviving. But he actually did survive. He was in a coma for quite a while, and he tells his story, what he believes happened while in the coma. And I watched it. I didn't read the book, but I watched his presentation on YouTube, like a TED Talk kind of thing. And it got me thinking about the way, how God is accused of showing himself, whether it's a picture of Mary on a piece of toast or scrambled eggs that somehow look like something, in all of the many ways that makes you stop and think, going, hang on a minute. If God wants to show himself, he's going to do it on a piece of toast. Are you serious? I mean, it is.
You can imagine it. I've got a plan.
Well, we'll do baked beans or scrambled eggs. Come on.
There's one bloke who lives with his mum in New Jersey, and I'm sending my face on a burnt piece of toast, and that's my signal.
That's the proof. That's
I tried sending myself as Jesus. No, that didn't work. I'm sending toast now. Yeah. My goodness. Yeah.
But on a much very quiet tonight, people. We haven't had anyone talking to us tonight. What's going on? Is it something we said?
I don't
hope you're
know.
watching-
Maybe we haven't offended enough people yet.
Ah, righto.
There's
I'm
still
your man.
time.
There's still
Um,
time.
So the lady who we're looking at getting on the show is a lady called Beck, a dear friend of mine. Listening from Broome right now, who knows? She's the one that put me onto this. She's very much a spiritual person, does have a kind of a Christian background, but and as is her mum, who we also want to get on the podcast hopefully next week when all goes according to plan. But she wanted me to have a look at this and then tell me what I thought about it. And it was just it's amazing, this story this guy tells about this. See, he was dead for all intents and purposes in this coma, knows nothing, has no memory whatsoever of being in this coma, but has clear visions about what happened in this incredible place, this most beautiful green rainbow, stunning plants and flowers and colors and creatures and angels and all sorts, just unbelievable picture he paints, and how he was kind of, no words were needed to be spoken, but he understood about, the whole essence of God and everything. It was just incredible. And I started explaining to Beck, I got 3/4 way through it and I went, this reminds me of a dream I had. Do you know when you have dreams and you wake up thinking, whoa, imagine that as a film. That was insane. All the most incredible things, most of which, when I have them, they're things I haven't even thought of. So I think, what's going on in my brain that while I'm asleep, I would create this incredible movie-like situation, sometimes not nice, but generally. And I thought, again, I'd revert back to God. Why would God, and it's all about near-death experiences, and we've talked about it a little bit, and we probably should talk a bit more about it. Why would God reveal himself to people who have nearly died, but not reveal the same thing to any of us? Do you know what I mean? It just doesn't seem, it doesn't sit well with me that near-death experiences are all very similar, but it seems strange that why would God do that? So you have to nearly die before you have an experience with God, and then come back and tell everyone about it, and then expect everyone to just believe it. I would love to believe what he was saying was true, but I can't, because if there was no such thing as dreams, so your brain cannot create dreams. Let's just pretend that's it. There's no such thing. You go to bed, you sleep, you wake up. Nothing happens. But it does. It creates the most incredibly vivid, realistic, incredible, bizarre things. Why? Well, we don't know why, and it doesn't really matter, but it's real. So if someone else has an experience when they've died, or a near-death experience that is very similar to a dream, would it not be more practical to say something has happened to the brain, similar, if you like, on what happens to your brain to create dreams? Do you know what I mean? And I argue this with God, with the belief in God, that if the only way you could experience certain things in our lives was because of God, then it would be a much stronger case to believe. But everything that I experienced as a Christian with God, I can not copy, but there's another way, meditation and all sorts of things. We won't go into that now, but just what do you think about that idea about this guy's got a compelling story? It's amazing, but it could just very well have been something that happened to his brain during the coma. Do you know what I mean? How do we know? How do you figure out whether that's something that's real? Like, he wants everyone to believe him. For what purpose? Okay, let's say I believe him. So what happens now?
Yeah. I'll jump in.
Yeah, go on.
Just because my brain, as wonderful as it is useless with retaining memory, and I'll forget by the time I hear Richard's great answer, and then I'll be cactus.
No, that's why I've got This is why I've got scribbling notes in front of me all the time, because I don't remember that stuff either.
I should do that. I definitely should do that. So a couple of things there. First thing that I thought of, my view, my take on why would God reveal this to someone who's nearly dying. I think my take on it is that we can make the mistake of God almost being like this entity that's waiting to, okay, so John Smith over there is nearly dead. I'm gonna hit him and I'm gonna interact. I'm gonna show him a whole bunch of stuff that I'm not gonna show someone else. I don't know if that's what's going on in those cases. I do think God intervenes and will give people different things. I'm not saying God can't, but I think my understanding would be that if we take the idea that we exist out of the being of God, it doesn't mean we are God, but God is life. God is love. God is the existence. So God is the very ground of our being, and we are born out of that. So therefore, if we're born out of that into this, when we die, we naturally would go back into that, right? Which is a very, very simple way of kind of talking about what I'm saying. In that very event of coming near to death, you are then coming near to going back into the ground of God, the existence, the being of God, which we can call heaven. We can articulate it and use all sorts of language for that. But the fact that you're drawing back closer to your Creator, going back into that, would then lead someone to naturally experience a greater measure of that Creator, of God, right? Yeah. That's so. I don't necessarily think it would be like, oh, cool, John's almost dead. Now's a perfect time for me to hit him with a bunch of green meadows and his dog that died last year running up to him, so we can go back and then he can write a book and tell everyone about it. It's more that's the natural. This is how I would understand it. That would be the natural result of becoming closer to go back into that. And the second thing that I was going to say about that, see, I told you I'd forget. So that was the first thing. What was the second thing that you said, Rowie, about?
Jeez, don't ask me.
So it was why would God do that? And then, oh yeah, sorry. How do we explain that?
Dreams.
Could that not just be dreams, right? It could just be the brain firing off. Now, I've experienced what the brain can do. You know, the brain is very, very powerful, and it can do some incredible things without, through chemicals and through all sorts of different things. And there is an idea that when you are dying, the brain is firing off a whole bunch of chemicals and sort of neurotoxins and all sorts of stuff that effectively flood your brain, and then you will experience certain things. So yeah, there is that argument, and that may be what's happening in some cases. But then there are those really difficult to explain cases that Rich has mentioned a couple of times, where people will have these near-death experiences, and what they will experience will be more than just a dream that is really nice and pleasant, but actually will give them information and details of things that they cannot possibly have known. Going up through the roof and then knowing how many skylights there are on the hospital roof that cannot be accessed. And it's like, they're just saying, well, this is just what I saw. And they're like, well, that's exactly what's on it. So weird stuff like that, where you go, well, that's knowledge you didn't have prior to this event.
Yep.
And that's much harder to explain. And I don't have an answer for it. But so I think it could be a combination of both. I think the brain does do some crazy stuff, and we can't discount that. But yeah, I can't shake this idea that when it's closer to our time, it's natural to draw closer to the peace that is, if God is love, and then you're drawing closer to that entity that is love. That's going to be a pretty good feeling.
But there's also nothing wrong with, and I'm not writing off near-death experiences at all. I mean, it's well documented, absolutely. They don't necessarily automatically be linked to there being a God. It could be it could be a whole bunch of things that just happen because of what the person has gone through. I mean, it's not like this near-death experience, I saw a light or whatever, then there must be this proof that God is real. Well, there's no proof whatsoever that's about God or God being real. We don't know what it means. What we do know is that the documentation proves that there's something happens to a lot of people, i.e., then this is very different from looking down on your body and being able to this was a and what made me concerned about this guy, and I'll cross to you in a sec, Rich, because I know you'll have something to say about this. What concerned me about this guy that's talking about this being he was a speck on the wing of a butterfly, not as a human, but just was aware that his presence, and what kind of, it may sound strange, but what kind of made me think was that there was a beautiful woman. This beautiful woman was staring at him, and I thought, okay, that seems like a strange thing to happen, like it was a man seeing a beautiful woman. That kind of felt weird to me, like it in among the whole God thing. And I'm not saying there shouldn't be a beautiful woman, but it just, I don't know, it just seemed a bit cheesy. And I'm saying this guy's not cheesy by any stretch. Do you know what I mean? I don't know how to articulate what it is that I felt, but I just thought that was kind of a strange thing to have seen and for him to articulate. Might not be anything to do with anything other than there was a beautiful woman there. But I don't know. Anyway, I won't say any more about it because I'm unsure about what it was that I felt, but it just felt a bit strange. So, Richard, we know you're strong on this. What do you?
Look, it's interesting because I find I've always since a young fella found this whole thing quite intriguing. Near-death experiences. A couple of I'm speaking. I won't go into the theology of it. If people are interested in I think some of the best thinking of Christian theology around the theology of death. Currently, I reckon you should listen to somebody called Father John Bear, Orthodox theologian. He's got some
very good
stuff. If you're going to listen to stuff, go listen to his stuff. But scientifically, near-death experience, what can we say? First of all, it's not death, it's near-death. So near-death experiences have nothing to say about the afterlife because it's still inaccessible. That you haven't crossed over, decayed, and then come back. You haven't yet died. That's what's called a near-death experience. So a lot of people overstate what's going on there. But some of the latest, and I'm saying if you're interested, read the latest meta studies around near-death experiences where they've looked at all of these reports, put it through some pretty rigorous sifting to come up with some things. And what I find really interesting about it is, first of all, it really challenges the current model of consciousness. Consciousness is the majority opinion is it's somehow tightly tied into brain activity. And so when there's no brain activity, there should be no conscious experience. And yet NDEs actually demonstrate that without brain activity, there's still consciousness. So that's quite an exciting field of study for anybody, not just a spiritual thing, but a actual what's going on in this thing called the human. But it seems that at least a good handful of NDEs have been demonstrated beyond a reasonable doubt that these people had knowledge that they could not have got through what we understand about how humans can get knowledge, which then challenges probably a more controversial understanding, which is human consciousness is actually limited to physical. These things seem to indicate that consciousness is actually something that is beyond the physical brain and body of the person because of how they could report what was happening several rooms down, word for word, that kind of thing. It doesn't prove it, but it suggests that there's something to think more deeply about that. We may get to the point where we go, well, consciousness is transphysical or metaphysical, or maybe it's not. There's some other explanations, but we don't. It's actually opened up that sort of thinking a bit more, which I think is quite exciting for knowledge. But well, you've said something about like when we dream, we can see stuff. We take chemicals, we see stuff. Therefore, all these things are just those things happening. And I think, I'm not saying you said it, Rowie. I've heard other people say it. What I'd like to do is ask people to bring a bit more rigorous thinking. Let's swap out, for want of a better word, visual imagination that happens when you sleep or have a vision or whatever, and just talk about your eyes. Like I can shine lights in my eyes. I can literally close my eyes and poke them with my fingers and see sparkly lights. Like, don't do that because you actually damage your sight, but that's a phenomenon. You poke it in. You can stimulate vision in all these sorts of things. So then you say, well, I was actually standing on the coast and I saw this beautiful sunset. And I'm like, no, sunsets aren't real because I can paint a picture of a sunset and you can see a sunset in my room. Therefore, the sunset you saw on the beach is false. It's the same kind of argument I hear people saying, oh, dreams or chemical trips, therefore anything else can't be real. Those things aren't logically following from them. All we can say is that there seems to be, like there's an organ for sight, which we can see light and interact with it. There seems to be a capacity in humanity to see imagination. You can dream it. Who knows what's happening there? Probably some random firing that we're putting in order. You can take some chemicals that stimulate it. Could it be that there's other things that we are seeing that with this organ called the imagination? So that's the question that's not closed in yet, without bringing, your preconceptions to it. So I think it's exciting because, part of my Christian experience, or I don't know, Christian might not be the right term because I actually got thrown out of a church because of it, is more on the mystical side of things. I have been in a room and then suddenly I am not in the room anymore. All of my waking physical sensations is somewhere else. I have an experience and I come back and I'm suddenly back in the room. I've had those experiences without extended periods of worship, meditation, no chemicals. There was no lead up to it. Somebody was actually speaking a boring message in church and suddenly I'm out and back again. So that's an experience. Now I've got things I think of what it means.
That's some serious shit you've been smoking there, brother.
Exactly. So I hear a lot of skeptics go, oh yeah, we know about those. You've put yourself into a state. Well, utter boredom and uncomfortable sitting in a chair is not any sort of meditative state that I've ever.
Was I preaching at the time? Is that
was it me? He wasn't too this time.
Anything to do with astral projection, Rich? Do you think?
Oh look, I'm going to get myself in so much trouble depending on who hears it. This was when I was younger. I was fascinated by it. I tried. It never worked for me. It never worked for me. None of that stuff ever worked for me until I did it in the context of church and God, a Pentecostal experience. That's the only place that's quote unquote worked for me. Whereas I've heard of other people having all sorts of really freaky experiences like that. So I think it's quite an unusual kind of situation. Yeah.
I think for us to know the amount of brain we actually use and how much, which means of course how much that is unused and what is in there I think the brain is capable of just about anything. To put limitations on what could happen. So with this guy I was talking about, with that with the book Proof of Heaven, I mean, I'm not for a second going to say absolute bunkum
Mm.
rubbish. I have no proof either way. I have no proof that it could be real. I have no proof that that might not be real. I don't know. And for anyone to make a statement other than that is arrogance, because we don't know. I mean, I most of my life, probably the last 30 years, I see flashes of blue and green and yellow just out of nowhere in my vision. And I have my eyes checked all the time. There's nothing wrong. There's nothing. I wear glasses, blah, blah, blah. But I always just I'll see this bright blue flash and I'll turn around and look at it. And I've just been there for 30 years. I mean, I've talked to the optometrist about it. They've got no idea what it could possibly be. There's nothing wrong. But this happens now. Who knows where that's coming from? And it doesn't cause any drama. It still freaks me out now. I'll look and go, what's that? And you can see this bright blue dot and it'll just disappear. And I mean, it's what you're talking about, Rich, about being in a place 1 minute, somehow out of it, like you're astral projecting into. That used to be a real cool thing we talked about back in the 70s. You could astral project. You know,
but depending which preacher you listen to, they still talk about it. There's some Jesus freaks still running around. It's great.
It depends on the mold. If it's Colombian gold you've been smoking, I mean, man, you can see anything. Seriously.
It's funny though. It's a great chat about the idea of psychedelics, right? Which now in the medical field, there's been a resurgence, and it seems like it's a resurgence, but in truth, it's actually been going for the last 15 years. It's not a flash in the pan, but it's starting to get some positive airwaves around this idea of the healing and therapeutic benefits of psychoactive substances. Our good friend Jade has mentioned about the difference that medicinal marijuana has made to his life with MS. We're seeing. I've had experience with ketamine for depression and things like that. It's been life changing. I know lots of people that have had these experiences with, done in the right setting and obviously under medical supervision and things like this. But we're finding that there is a function to these things, and that function is related to the brain. It's specifically, and for people with PTSD, particularly complex PTSD, and there's a range of conditions where it's particularly beneficial for, not just for pain, but for actual complex mental health conditions. And even though we can't fully understand how it's having the benefit, the evidence is indisputable, based on obviously people experiencing the treatment. But it's something to do with unlocking the brain. There's parts of our subconscious and things like that aren't accessible on a constant level for good reason, because that's the part of the brain that holds things that are really critical to our identity, to our sense of self, to our way of navigating the world. So if that was open to fluctuation on a daily basis, you have one bad day and then you're in all sorts of trouble. So the brain does protect this sort of stuff, and these things come in and they'll actually open it up and let the brain kind of almost defrag itself like a computer. Remember, you used to have to defrag your computer. You probably don't have to do it anymore, but it would like consolidate all the stuff and do something we don't quite understand, but then your computer would run better for some reason. It's almost like that. The reason I'm saying all this is because for me as a Christian, with the understanding of God being not just for Christians, but for anyone who is, if you're made in the image of God, you are part of you. God is in you. There is a part, there is something within you, within each and every one of us. Maybe the thing that gets in the way of us being able to access that is our consciousness, is our trauma, is our stuff, is our anxiety, our normal everyday stuff, our human type stuff, where we're you're thinking, you're double guessing, you're doing all this sort of stuff. And what this stuff seems to be able to do is to kind of just press pause on all that for a while and then let let you access it, and kind of the brain does its thing, whether you understand it or not. So it's interesting. Maybe that's the same thing that dreams are doing. You know, we're asleep, so our minds, our consciousness isn't getting in the way of it. It's kind of, you're just letting it do its thing. Maybe it's a similar thing with near-death experiences, where it's like the ultimate, you know, you're out of the way and you're experiencing something that you can't quite understand, something within us. I don't know, but all I do know is that if it's not healing, it's not God. If it's not healing, if it's not restoring, if it's not doing something that is supposed to be beneficial, it's not. That cannot be God. That cannot be something that is what God wants to be doing. So, yeah, it's fascinating though. It's a great discussion, and it's one that, you know, should be spoken about more.
Well, something you just said then sort of opens me up to thinking I've got a great discussion on you saying what God, it's not God, which is a very emphatic statement, which I could challenge you on right now, but I can't be bothered. Is it because this is interesting? I really want to ask you guys what when you said that, Luke, quoting almost like in the literal sense that this is what God has said. Is your interpretation of God in any way, shape, or form influenced by the character of Jesus? Now, let me just clarify what I mean by that. Is that, do you see God as a completely and utterly singular, standalone, let's just say concept, for want of another word, not a concept, but an actuality of a God? Is there any way that makes you, when you think about God, what he might do and say, and influenced at all by the character of Jesus?
In every way, emphatically.
So everything you think about God, it connects with who you've seen, remembering that he isn't God per se first and foremost. He's the son, the
correct,
alleged son of God.
Correct. Yeah.
Who wasn't able to fulfill the complete what's the word? He was a human. Well, the story is, of course, he was a human being, a man who was the son of God. This is where it gets confusing, because it's supposed to be God incarnate, as it were, but the God was the first, the creator of, so therefore Jesus can't be exactly the same.
Yeah. You're right. You're right. Not exactly the same.
So every idea you have about God, is it influenced by what you've seen as the character of Jesus, assuming by that that Jesus has been everything that God is for you to see, according to the scriptures?
You've hit the nail on the head. And it's a really, for me, it's a really important distinction. And it's one that I was a significant, I can't even emphasize enough how important this development was for me in understanding the role of Jesus in showing who God is. And I'll refer to God as the Father, but just for ease. But for me, the role of Jesus, and Jesus is not the Father, although he is God, but not that God's confusing. I don't want to get into the Trinity sort of stuff, but you're right.
No, I
understand
exactly what you're saying.
It's not God saying, well, I'm gonna just leave everything that I am and make myself into this, because God is existence and is life. That's it's an impossibility. But my take on it, and not just an opinion, my study and my many years of wrestling and reading and speaking to and hearing from theologians far smarter than I am, and obviously reading the Bible, which is clearly what this says, this understanding that we thought we knew what God was like. And you see that reflected all through the Old Testament. Sometimes we get a good picture of it, but a lot of times we get it wrong, right? Because we kind of think that God operates the way we operate, and is angry or vindictive or picks sides or is violent or is kind of this capricious type deity. until Jesus comes along as part of this plan to actually fully reveal who God is. So whilst not being the Father, he came to reveal what the Father is like. And that's what got him into all sorts of trouble, particularly with those who had already had generations of religion and history that said this is what God is like. We know what God is like. We don't need, and he's come and he's gone, actually no. This is what God is like. And that is huge. And that culminates for me on the cross, being the sacrifice, like a God who would sacrifice himself rather than rain down fire on those who are doing the wrong thing to him. One that destroys the scapegoating mechanism in that very moment, this idea that someone has to take it all. The idea that God is violent, the idea that God is this warrior God who is simply interested in setting up another dictatorship, another empire. Jesus comes and turns all of that on its head completely, and it is what got him killed. And even in the narratives, in the gospel, when he comes back, there's multiple stories there where he's talking about actually Jesus is the key, the hermeneutical key for which you are to then read all of the Bible through. So that moment, that is the absolute revelation of what God is like. So if you're reading a story about God anywhere in the Bible and it doesn't sound like Jesus would do that thing, then that's not God. That's how big this is. This isn't just a reflection of God. This isn't just God's good side. It is a total reordering of things for me and for anyone, I believe, to have to re-look at this is what God is like. So if you're reading a story about God killing a whole bunch of people, men, women, and children, because he'd promised the Israelites that this was their land and so they can go in and slaughter that might have been what they thought God was like for many, many years. But you can't read that through the lens of Jesus and go, well, that's what God would do. If you take Jesus to be actually the full revelation of who God was. And that's, for me, one of the critical things, because that changes everything from that point going forward, because you can't claim ignorance anymore about, well, we just thought God was like this. Well, no, if God revealed himself fully in this man and the character of this man, then that's what your faith has to reflect. Whether it's a year or a couple of days after he died and was resurrected, or whether it's 2,000 years after he died and was resurrected with a whole bunch of baggage and a whole bunch of stuff that's gone on in then, you have to then go back and look at it through that lens. And that's what allows me to do this. That's unequivocally 100%. That's how I view God. Now it doesn't limit God to that. I know God's far bigger than that. God is transcendent. God is God. But I do know that if I see God presented or represented in a certain way, if it doesn't line up with Jesus and what we know about Jesus and the stories, then it's not God for me.
Rich, do you concur?
Yeah, it's interesting because when I think about or talk about this concept of God or our conception of God, there's two modes I do it. One is as a Christian, and what Luke so well put, I don't think there's if Christianity, and I'm paraphrasing a great theologian, author, Raskell. If Christianity is in any way true, it has to be what Luke just described. If Christianity is true at all, it's only true in that form. All these other forms of Jesus coming once as a lamb and then coming back as a lion to slaughter everybody, that can't be true. So if Christianity is true, the only true form is what Luke's talked about. Everything else has so many problems that it's just, I have to reject them out of hand, these counterfeits or fake Christianities. But when I think about God, not as a Christian, but as a I don't know, if I take away my faith commitments based on things, and I think it a bit more philosophically, the only account of this conception of God really looks like a classical theist God, which ends up being transcendent. And when we look at human experience, we see a thread of goodness that just keeps. The only way we can even begin to choose good or even think about good is in comparing the limited little pieces of good to the ultimate transcendental of goodness itself. And the same goes with truth. When we even talk about truth or think about truth or even able to choose and move toward truth, it only makes sense in the human experience if there's some sort of transcendental called truth itself. So truth, being, bliss, joy, all of these things end up being this converging point at the horizon of eternity or infinity, which we call God. Any other account seems to fall far short. So I can still say God is good, even without being a Christian, based on that, because any other account is illogical to me. If God is in any way that's sensible, he has to be goodness, truth, being itself. And then when you take a step into Christianity, you get far more stuff based on a Christian revelation. So I don't think there's any sensible way of talking about God in any way that he's not ultimately good, Christian or otherwise. So that's my egghead take on things.
I just want to find out whether our comment section is actually working, because I don't think we've had a night with nothing. If you're listening and you've got access to your little window, can you let us know that we are actually, that we're here, that we are real, that we're actually talking? Can you hear us? And if you're listening, and we're not asking you to put comments on, but just really want to know whether the StreamYard comments is actually working. So just jump on there, whoever you are, and just say, yes, we are here, and then we shall move on. Otherwise, we're probably likely to cry ourselves to sleep tonight,
Cry ourselves to sleep.
No, we're not. No.
We lost you, Rowie. Mike.
Stupid thing. It's back on.
He keeps nodding off.
Yep. That was very interesting what both of you said. Again, you kind of sort of think that you've come to a place where I there's nothing you're going to say which I haven't heard before, yada yada yada, and that's simply not true. Both of what you said then is stuff. I mean, I haven't heard it quite like that, which is why I asked the question, because I had the oh, here we go. Hi guys, I'm here. I've been listening, just driving as well. Thank you. That's good. We
Legends.
Driving and listening. How that in itself sounds a little bit dangerous, Fenton. Been listening.
He's
to
not watching. Yeah.
It was only dangerous when you made him comment.
Yeah, that's right.
Trying to cut off the road. Bloody Rowie was the last thing.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Love you guys. Thank you.
And yeah, fabulous. Nice to have you tune in, because I spent 40 years doing radio, and it's a really weird experience sitting in a little glass box talking into a microphone, not knowing who's out there, who's listening, who's not listening. It's an extraordinary experience, and I did it for a long, long time, and it is very, very difficult. And this in itself is a little bit like that. I got halfway through, and I thought, we could be talking to absolutely no one except ourselves. And that is a very real possibility. But to know that you guys are listening, I just thought it was weird that there was no comments on here, which made me think that something wasn't working correctly, including my brain. But no.
Hey, Rowie,
Yeah.
You're talking about, has this podcast impacted you in any way? Also it'd be interesting to see if anybody listening has had that sort of experience. But for me, I was just reflecting on that in this last discussion. I came into it with certain things I thought I'd never believe. And some things I thought I believed, and a lot of them have sort of shifted significantly. One of the things on the sort of God side, I am convinced now that obviously still open, but I'm far more convinced now that if you believe in God, it has to be a God that is infinite love. Otherwise, anything else is incoherent to me. It doesn't make sense. I don't know what you're talking about. How did you get there? You're just plucking something out. If you think of it, thinking of it robustly and deeply, that's the conclusion I think you sort of have to come to. If you're a Christian, it's the kind of Christianity Luke's talking about. I'm far more convinced about that now than I ever have been. But one thing that surprised me is, I think there's a third option that deeply thinking, sensible people might come up with it, and that's atheism. I can see how people can quite legitimately find themselves there. I personally, based on my history and experience and the way I see the world and all of this whole mixture, I've found myself here. But when I talk to sensible, open-hearted people like the ones on this podcast, and because of this podcast, I've gone and found even more voices. I'm like, oh yeah, I can see. There's nothing wrong with you. You're not some moral imbecile. You're not some intellectual sort of broken person to find yourself there. I'm like, yeah, I can see that. And that's actually quite a logical conclusion to sit there. So that's something that's surprised me greatly. Doesn't mean I think atheism is the ultimate correct view. Otherwise I would be an atheist, but I can very much see how it's a very legitimate way of being in this world based on what we all experience. And I think that the line between me and atheism is quite narrow. And it's narrow because you're consistently engaging your mind and your heart in this world. And I think if you are engaging your mind and heart in this world, if you don't doubt what you really believe, I don't think you're doing it right. You got your head in the sand, and that's about it. So, that's something that's really impacted me personally, and I think I'm a better person. I'm a better Christian. I'm a better all round because of it.
I failed.
I would echo that.
No, and look, ditto, because if I'd set up this podcast with pick any two random Christian people, and you know what you're going to get, it wouldn't have been anywhere near as engaging, anywhere near as enjoyable, any more educational, or I mean, it makes no difference about where I sit as an unbeliever, because that the only person or entity that can change that is God himself, itself, herself, whatever. That's the only change that can come to me at this moment.
Mm-hmm.
The amount of changes that I've experienced in the last 6 months, the whole understanding from you guys, because it is purely about you guys, because you guys are not the run-of-the-mill stereotypical Christian people. I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you both if you were. It would have driven me up the wall a long time ago. And I would have thought, you know what, this is just not worth it. This is just bullshit. This is crazy. But it's not like that. It's I find it strangely engaging. And I find myself going, don't indulge them too much.
Mm-hmm.
You're the arch enemy in all of this. We're not, but the more we talk about it, the more I understand. Now, it doesn't change. What it does is it gives me a better understanding about where you're at. and how it differs from what I would have thought you were at, as I was at as a Pentecostal, as a narrow. It's like a narrow cast. You can only fit into this little bit here. Don't go outside of that, because we don't want you to do that. We want you to be in this little area where you don't think too much, and we'll control you, and it's all good. We're all got it all under control. And
We
then
know
I
it
hear
well.
about stuff. Yeah, of course. I mean, as a non-believer, is that if you are out there and you are a Christian person struggling, listen to these guys, because it will open you up to a whole new world. Well, I'm not saying it's right, because I don't believe in it, but I will be fair in saying that if you're going to go down that path, and if you're struggling in life and you want to believe in God or Jesus to help you through, go for it, because it's a hell of a lot better than suffering on your own and feeling miserable and ostracized and all of those kind of things. Go for it. I'd rather see you happy believing in something that I don't believe in, rather than struggling and having a miserable life. If that's what got me through my time in the 80s, was a belief in God. History now, but that's what happened, and it saved me. It's better to believe in something positive, but just try and avoid going to the constraints of a Pentecostal closed up kind of. I don't know what the alternative is as far as churches go, but I'm just going to jump in. And Fenton says, Rich just described why I listen. Okay.
Interesting. Yeah. Thanks, mate.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I was going to ask you, Rowie.
Yeah, mate.
And Rich kind of did, and you have just covered a lot of it, but maybe explain the difference between what you thought the podcast was going to be versus what it's become.
Great question.
Yeah, that's because we've spoken about it off air, but it has evolved into something very different, and part of that is because you probably got a couple of very different questions than what you were expecting. But it's not just us. I mean, it's part of it is yourself and obviously the other guys we've had on. I think that'd be good to touch on. Like this idea that started out as something and has ended into something else would be cool. How is that?
Well, I think the original catalyst would have been one of frustration and anger in its first form of in that I was thinking about this yesterday. I was laying in bed and I felt really ripped off that 25 years of my life was spent believing in something that ended up being not real. And then I thought, well, that's just crazy, because everything that I've experienced and have is because I believed, and because I rang Sunshine FM as a young guy and ended up getting on air and worked in 11 radio stations and just done amazing things, and ended up marrying Lou and having 3 beautiful children. It's like, how could I for a second, and it's really hard to separate that disappointment and anger of those 25 years doing that and not being, like fatalistic about, it was all meant to be that you did that, because it was just like, that's what I did, that's what I chose, and that's what happened, and here I am. And I can't be disappointed in that. But when I decided to get into do a podcast, because Rich and I had been talking off air, I mean, just as on in Messenger about, I don't even know how it started. We ended up talking about stuff and found out from the beginning, the essence was that we had things in common, which I would have thought, I've always thought Richard and I were pretty much the complete opposites. I came from a background of sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and my religion, my faith, probably wasn't as pure as his, even though I didn't really know him all that well, being my, nephew-in-law and stuff like that. but then we started talking on Facebook, and I thought, oh, Rich is actually seems to be like he's questioning some things and isn't 100% certain about certain things. And I thought we have a base. And then I put a rant on Facebook about my faith in 25 years. I can't even remember what it said, blah, 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 blah. And then in the end, I said, I'm going to start a podcast. If anyone's interested in helping out, or because I don't know how to do this, give us a yell. And not surprising, no one said anything. And then Rich came on and we started talking again. And he responded saying, I wouldn't mind doing that. And I went, really? I never ever thought in a zillion years that you and I would be doing something like this.
Me neither.
And so my aim out of anger driven was to get back at the thing that occupied me for 25 years and I want to get in there and tell people about what it's like and what a rip-off is, and you're stupid for believing in all of this bullshit and blah 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 blah. So that was my I don't really have a concrete or clear view of what my aim was. I really went in not knowing what would happen, did not expect it to be anything like this. I thought it would be an angry, argumentative, I'm going to get these guys because they are so wrong. They have no idea, and I'm going to nail them. I didn't quite. That's probably exaggerated. I didn't have quite think that way, but it was the expectations were that of animosity and argument and that kind of thing. And it kind of, there has been moments of frustration, understandably, but they have mellowed into something amazing. I would have thought, what are we on? 25th episode. I would have thought by about the 11th or 12th, I was just about ready to throw it in. I thought this is going nowhere. If we can't argue and I can't prove them wrong, what is the point? What am I doing? Why is the point? And then suddenly it expanded out to being something more than that. And it has continued to do that and expand, and the feedback from people listening is that's what they are enjoying. I challenge anyone to show me that there's something like this happening elsewhere in the world. I'm sure there must be, by virtue of the fact that there are so many people like, but it's different, it's fresh, and it's interesting. And when people like Fenton contact us and Tamara saying that they love listening, it's like, wow, that makes it so worthwhile. You only need, I don't care if there's only 5 people who love what we're doing. I'd be disappointed that we're not touching more people. There are more, but you know what I mean? It just feels great to know that people respect what we're doing and why we're doing it. So I hope that answers your question, Luke.
It's brilliant.
Yeah. Awesome. Absolutely awesome.
It's interesting, isn't it? It's a strange dynamic.
It is.
It
is. But you know what? Something that Rich said really resonated with me just then when he said he is closer. It's a narrower line between where he's at and atheism, and I would agree. And that's not an indictment on either of our faith. I think I can speak for Rich, but I know, because I also echo his thing that through this exercise, I feel like my faith is far stronger because you're forced to articulate stuff that you don't have a lot of these conversations in church circles. So when you have to have the conversation, especially if it's broadcast and recorded, and you need to kind of actually think through what you're saying, and which means you have to reconcile it with yourself. And in your own mind to be able to do that. So yeah, I feel it's definitely strengthened my faith, but it's also really, it's easy from a Christian perspective to demonize atheists. We're very good at it. Yeah, the atheists are almost the boogeyman. It's this sense of, well, if you start deconstructing or asking questions before you know it, you're going to be an atheist. But that's this idea that's like atheism is like the opposite of a Christian, I think is wrong, and that's a really weird thing to say. It's actually a bit of a paradox, because
Yeah.
definitively, I guess it is, but in reality, it's not, because that's what we're experiencing here. We are far, far more similar than we are different, and we may end up in different spaces, but a lot of the time we'll agree with 90% of what we're talking about and just differ in the cause or the outcome or God's role in it, for example. But what I've also learnt about atheism is that atheism is almost never, from what I've seen, driven from the caricature that we can tend to make it out to be in Christian circles of, well, if you just want to live an immoral life and do whatever you want and, like, shun God, then you'll be an atheist, so then you can go and do whatever. And it's actually got nothing to do with it. Atheism is more often than not caused by a keen sense of injustice, and it's a sense of, where is the justice of suffering? Where is God in this? And in the very best forms of atheism that I've seen, and Roy, you'd be one of them. It's that sense of, and the other guys as well, Jason and Suresh, it's that sense of, this is important. This means a lot to me. I care for humanity. I care for this earth. I care for people. And my problem with God is that I see a lack of God in these situations. And I get it. I totally understand that. And I think for me, the God that I love is also has a keen sense of injustice. Injustice is incredibly important. That's why I think it's so important. Isn't that, it's just crazy for me that whilst it might end up in a different space, it's that same core passion and love for people and keen sense of injustice that is driving that. That's not the boogeyman. That's not an evil, immoral person. That might be someone who's landed in a different outcome to you, or a different reasoning to you, but someone who cares deeply and loves deeply. And how can that person be an enemy or even be wrong? In the sense of God may exist, and they may be wrong in thinking God doesn't exist or whatever. But at the end, but at the end of the day, if they're living in a way that is loving and filled with that passion for injustice and love and care for humanity, like Suresh, who is an atheist and right now is comforting a family, I can't think of a more Christ-like thing. Who cares whether he believes in God or not? Look what he's doing. You think God's sitting up there going, "Oh God, I wish he'd said that prayer. I'd be so proud of him right now." But instead, I'm furious. Are you joking? That's what an So anyway, long story short, we're the same.
No, beautiful.
We might end up in different spaces, but yeah.
But I love it when you were talking. Then I just imagined, okay, we could all jump in our cars with our family and go out in the middle of the bush and have a barbecue. Yeah. Regardless, what the hell difference does it make what you believe? You know what I mean? It doesn't impact on our ability to care. The one thing, ironically, that we have in common with each other is God, for different reasons.
That's hilarious, Rory.
No God, no podcast. Do you know what I mean?
It's brilliant.
There's nothing negative about what we can do if we choose not to make it a negative thing.
Correct.
We choose to respect one another's opinions. We understand that you're wrong and I'm right, and we can move on from that. Too easy. So, Tamara has jumped on. It's 3 minutes to 10. Well, it's actually gone past 10 now, but 3 minutes to 10. She said, yes, you guys are different to what I expected out of the podcast. I really appreciate it. And Kirk loves it too. Definitely challenging and interesting discussions. What a great comment. Okay, that's fabulous, Tamara. Next time you're listening, drill down a bit more on that, if you wouldn't mind. Saying we're different. In which way are we different? What were your expectations of this podcast? Why did you start listening in the first place? And definitely challenging and interesting discussions. So do you guys know Tamara, don't you?
Yep.
Yeah. So she's a Christian lady.
We pay her
Okay.
weekly to listen.
Are you serious? I pay her as well. Jeez, this is a rort, Tamara. You don't even, that's not even your name. I don't know who you are, but you're just making a lot of money. She's got 3 contracts on the go at the moment.
Yeah, just
8
playing
years
all of us.
Christianity and neither.
Yeah.
Thank you for commenting and Fenton for listening in as well. Don't know where my brother was in all of this. He is not available, but yeah, no, look, it's as usual. We start off with a particular subject and we incorporate other stuff. The one thing I did want to quickly mention, and I'd like to talk about in another time, and when we're talking about near-death experiences, love to talk about deja vu and what we can make of that, because that's
glitch in the matrix.
Sorry,
the glitch in the matrix.
It literally, yeah, that's right. I find it amazing. You can sit there and go, "Oh my god!" And no matter how weird it sounds, like you know what's going to happen next. Whenever you think what's going to happen next is never what actually happens next. You go, "Oh, Tamara's saying she's not paid enough." Well, that's your negotiation problems, not ours. We are giving our time. I mean, these guys are on $75 an hour. I don't know what, I don't know what you want.
We'll negotiate, Tam.
Yeah.
We'll see if we can take
stuff.
some off Fenton.
Fenton, mate, he's on 3-figure income. There's no question.
Because we have to pay him US dollars. That's the problem.
Yes,
Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah. It's the exchange rate that kills us.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Okay. I think that about wraps it up, guys.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that was great.
Awesome.
If anyone wants to go back and check, and how can they access? So the 25 episodes are on. If you want to find it, it's actually YouTube /atheistbelieverpastor/streams. They are all available. I'm not sure if you just go into YouTube and just put in an atheist believer in a pastor walk into a bar episodes, you might be able to just find them all. And if you want to go back and check out any of the ones that we're talking about, there's some great sessions in there. We will look for a new one. Hopefully we'll get a lady who's a mother of a friend of mine. We talked this afternoon to try and get it together for tonight, but ran out of time. An interesting lady. I'll just I'll tell you this bit here. Becca, who's the friend of mine, saying, my mum is phenomenal at this stuff, very spiritual, and comes interestingly from a Christian background. Her father was a pastor, which is Beck's dad. She has moved away from the church and will make for a very wonderful chat. She lost a child. He was 3 and Beck was 5. He died at home in her arms. She has a pretty deep insight into beautiful understanding of the afterlife. I'm absolutely enthralled by the thought of this discussion. So we're going to try and get, I don't even know the lady's name at this stage. We'll try and get her on next week. Hopefully we might have Jason and Suresh back. And if not, we will come up with another subject and talk about it. Guys, thank you so much. Thanks to everyone out there listening tonight, wherever you are in this wonderful, wonderful world. Next Wednesday, of course, the date will be the 26th of June. Thank you much for your company. I hope you enjoyed it tonight. Luke and Rich, thanks very much as always. Let's do it. We'll reconvene and come out next Wednesday with an atheist to believe in a pastor walk into a bar. Thanks, guys.
Thanks,
Look
mate.
forward to it.
Good night, all.